We also have next Wednesday at 4 p.m. We're doing a presentation in conjunction with Judson Manor for an exhibition, a satellite exhibition from the archives called City Reveries that is up there. And we have photographers Stuart Pearl and Jenny Jones presenting their artwork during that Zoom, I'm going to call it a webinar. And on Thursday, November 19th from 7 to 8:30, we will be opening a new exhibition both in the gallery space and opening reception on Zoom. It's about body, about face, and it is a small group figurative exhibition which examines the representation of African-American art and culture, the figure in African-American art and culture. The artists that are in this show were taken from the big Seen Unseen show that happened at the archives last September. And they are archived artists Lawrence Baker, Devon Brantley, Jaquez Jackson, Amanda King, Yvonne Polkwich, Lysandra Robinson, and Tony Williams. So I hope that you will both visit us in the exhibition space. The show will be up until January 2021. And also please join us for the reception on Zoom. So now I would like to introduce Megan Elps, our manager of marketing and programming, and she's going to introduce our guest speaker and also just give you a little housekeeping about Zoom. Megan?
Hi everyone, nice to see you. So we're going to give you just a little Zoom housekeeping. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Zoom at this point in time, but it never hurts to have a little bit of a refresher, especially how we're going to run the program today. So first thing to be aware of is that you can actually alter the view. So we're going to actually do it so that it's going to be screen sharing, and then you'll see Judy in the right-hand corner. That should just do automatically, but there is a choice between gallery and active speaker view. If you have that choice, active speaker view means that the person who's speaking is going to be a larger image in front instead of our little peanut gallery up here. Another thing to be aware of is that there is a chat function. So the chat function is down at the bottom, and if you click on it, you have a drop-down menu. And it can either say all panelists and attendees, in which case that's talking to all of you all, or you can say all panelists, in which case it's going to be talking to Judy and us. So we ask that we just kind of use the chat sparingly, kind of like in class. You don't want to have too much side talking. And the most important part is the Q&A function. So it's going to look like two little chat bubbles. And if you have any questions for Judy at any time, go ahead and type them in. We'll gather them up and we'll ask her at the end. And that way it just kind of keeps the presentation moving and we can kind of put them in an order. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Judy. Judy's actually done presentation with us before on the burning river of Cuyahoga. I believe that was last year, Judy?
Yep, that was, yep.
Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
The 50th anniversary.
200 years ago, it feels like, right, at this point.
Right.
So Judy McKeegan joined the park system in 2010 when completing her MA in history from Cleveland State University. Judy has had the joy and the privilege of researching, compiling, and sharing the history of Cleveland Metroparks, as well as local history of the many communities in the Metroparks district. She was the lead author and chief editor of the book, The 100-Year Trail, a centennial celebration of the Cleveland Metroparks, and she served on the Centennial Celebration Steering Committee. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and hand it over to Judy. And again, don't forget that Q&A, and we'll ask it at the end. Thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Megan. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. Hope everybody has like their favorite beverage with them and is sitting back in a nice comfy chair. That's one good thing about these Zoom things, right? So I'm excited to share this kind of interesting, but maybe not so well-known tidbit of Cleveland history. And we're going to take a bit of a dive into this, this little story and see if we can pick apart why it's important, if it's important, and you know, how it relates to us today, if it does that at all. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you the infamous Cleveland Bridge War of 1836. So, two infant cities on the opposite banks of the Cuyahoga River, the young Cleveland on the east bank of the river, and her rival Ohio City on the left, on the west bank of the river. All that was between them was a flimsy bridge, a floating bridge made of old logs that could get you from one side of the river to the other. Enter James Clark, John Willie, Josiah Barber, and Richard Lord, among others. Two of those men have an idea to create a mercantile kingdom in the Columbus Peninsula, the Cleveland Flats. They build a bridge of stone and wood, getting people directly into the Columbus Peninsula and bypassing the young Ohio City. The Ohio City residents, fearful for their livelihoods, take up weapons, and with the cry of "two bridges or none," they attack the bridge. That sounds kind of exciting, doesn't it? Yeah, well, anyway, full disclosure, this picture in front of you has nothing to do with Cleveland or even the United States. It's actually a picture by Edward Delacroix calling "Liberty Leading the People," and it is from the French Revolution of 1830, one of the many small French revolutions. But I thought it was kind of a fun picture to put into our presentation tonight because we don't have any paintings of the bridge wars. So we're going to step back a little bit before this battle of the bridge and find out exactly why it was so important that these people were willing to go to battle over a bridge over the Cuyahoga River. Well, one word comes to mind, and that is canal. In 1827, the first section of the Ohio and Erie Canal opened along the Cuyahoga River in Canal Basin, what's going to be Canal Basin Park, when the towpath that finally reaches all the way there, down in the Columbus Peninsula. There is the spot where the Ohio and Erie Canal went into the Cuyahoga River, and then from there, of course, out to Lake Erie, hence the Ohio and Erie Canal. So what was so important about this canal? Well, before the canal came into being, we were a bit isolated. There were about 500 people in the city of Cleveland, even less on the other side of the river in what would become Ohio City. The canal opened in 1827. Again, population around 500. By 1836, there were almost 6,000 people in Cleveland. That is a huge, huge increase, and it was due to the canal. The canal became a route for farmers in the southern area of Ohio, or even not so southern like Parma, to bring their goods to market, to get them to the canal, to get them up to the river, and ship them actually to the east coast of the states. All of a sudden, goods, things like fine china and bonnets and shoes and liquors and cigars and all kinds of the finer things of life, along with some really just good needed things, were coming in from the east, up from New York, up from the east coast, up the Erie Canal to Lake Erie, down to Cleveland. So there was this circle of commerce that was going on. And as you can say, as you can tell from what I said earlier, 500 people to about 6,000, we're in a boom town, right? So that was going on in the canal. These are some of the earliest pictures we have of the canal, but of course they are not from the 1820s, as most of you probably know. Photography didn't really become a thing until the late 1840s. So these pictures were probably taken in the 1850s. The one on this side of the screen here, this is a picture, as far as we know, unless it's been mislabeled over the years, of the final lock of the canal before it went into the Cuyahoga River. And I'll show you a map a little bit later of where that is. And then the other picture here on the bottom, in the lower right corner, that's the way lock. So before the boats could get into Cleveland from the south, they had to go through a way lock where they were, their boat was measured and weighed, and then weighed with the contents, because you paid a toll for the freight that you carried on the canal. This just gives you an idea by looking at these pictures how busy it was in that era, how crowded and dirty it probably was, and just how central the canal was to Cleveland at that time. As I said earlier in my little introduction there, John Willie. John Willie was the first mayor of Cleveland. Cleveland became a city in 1836, and he was its first mayor. And he also was a real estate developer, along with James Clark and a few other associates of theirs. These men were part of a group that came sort of with the canal. Some of them had been here a little bit earlier, but most of these gentlemen came to Cleveland in the 1830s when it was a boomtown to take advantage of the mercantile and the real estate opportunities that were here. So John Willie is one of them, and he was joined also by Josiah Barber and Richard Lord, who were brother-in-laws. And John Willie was mostly interested in the east side of the canal. He was the mayor of Cleveland, obviously, right? Now, Ohio City, or the City of Ohio as it is officially titled, was chartered one day before Cleveland. Both of them were chartered early in 1836. They had become large enough to be cities. Ohio City had about 2,000 residents, though, to the about 6,000 in Cleveland. So Ohio City was a smaller city. Up until around 1800, the Cuyahoga River was the farthest westernmost boundary of the United States. So Europeans couldn't settle on the other side until the Indian treaties, Treaty of Greenville, let them settle there. So Ohio City had a bit of a lagging start behind Cleveland. But these two men were both interested in real estate and making some money, as we do. John Willie was the mayor, and yes, he did have a vested interest in the Cleveland real estate. Just a little side note, Barber may sound familiar to those of you that might be West Siders or have an occasion to go to the West Side. This is West 25th Street, and as you're heading towards I-90 from, say if you've been down to the West Side Market and you're heading back over to I-90 to go either east or west, you're gonna pass Barber Avenue. So Josiah Barber had great grandiose visions for Ohio City, and this is kind of his legacy, little street like that. Just thought that was an interesting side note. So this is the real estate that they were interested in. For the most part, John Willie and James Clark and his associates were taking care of this area right here. They had bought up land in the Columbus Peninsula. So in this little peninsula made by the twisty turns of our crooked river. And a little bit up into here too, but the canal is right here. So here's the canal coming through, and here's where it goes into the river. So this is the Columbus Peninsula, a really good spot, I would say, right? If the canal is right there. There was also a lot of real estate development going around Superior and St. Clair right here. Most of it at this point in time was definitely west of Public Square though. Again, facing the river, facing the canal, using that as transportation. So this is James Clark and James. The only thing is they also had a little bit of land that they bought up here, technically on the west side of the river, because this is where that Columbus Bridge went in. Now, Josiah Barber and Richard Lord, his brother-in-law, they were buying up the land here on the east side of the river, close to Whiskey Island, and had envisioned a commercial center in that part of the city. Here is a close-up of that. So you can see from this 1835 map, which was drawn by the county surveyor, Ahaz Merchant, which I think is a great name to have when you're talking about a city that's just becoming commercial. If your name is Merchant, I think that's pretty cool. But the Columbus Bridge, right down here, where it still stands today, that's the bridge that John Willie and James Clark built to get people to this area here. You notice it's called Gravity Center. It also was called Cleveland Center. They really envisioned this as the downtown of Cleveland. This was going to be where the grand hotels and stores and residences were going to be. If you've been to the Flats, you know it didn't quite work out like that, but that was the vision at that time. The public landing, it says over here, this is where the steamships landed, even in the 18 teens and 1820s. ships coming in from, and sailing ships, and later steamships coming in from the lake down the river. And this is where the landing was. My guess is because it was a little protected from the river up here. But for whatever reason, that was the public landing. So this was a good spot of real estate, right? This is that floating bridge that originally was the only bridge for many, many years that connected the east and west sides of the river, right here. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that floating bridge was. And this is the Canal Basin. Again, here's where the canal goes into the river, the last couple of locks. The Canal Basin was a turning basin, so the canal boats could turn around and then go back down the canal. Another little picture of this, Richard Lord and Josiah Barber not only envisioned great buildings and commerce in this area, but they also decided that perhaps they could dig, and it's there now, but it wasn't at the time, dig through the old bed of the river and the current bed of the river in 1836, a proposed ship channel right here, so that you could come down here and go right through here, and you wouldn't even have to go into Cleveland at all. Also, they were going to create an extension of the canal right along here. Again, trying to keep all that commerce for themselves. This is from the 1836 Directory of Cleveland. These are some of the hotels and coffee houses, and I say that a coffee house sold a lot more than coffee, a lot stronger drink than coffee. So it was also basically taverns. There were just different licenses if you called it a coffee house instead of a tavern. So these are in Cleveland. This is from the 1836 Directory, and already you can see a bit of a slight to Ohio City, because the Ohio City Directory doesn't have anything like this. It has lists of people's names. It might have a gentleman who ran a hotel, or it might have the name of a hotel, but they weren't called out like they are in the Cleveland one, where there is actually a page that lists the different hotels and coffee houses. However, they did have something like this. The Ohio City Exchange, a lovely hotel, 5 stories high with a dome on the top that was lighted that ships could see out at the lake, stood in Ohio City at the corner of Center Streets and Center and Main Street. I don't have an image of it. There's none that exists. The hotel itself existed until around the 1850s at least, and then in some form even later on. For some reason, there's no drawing of it. This is actually a hotel in Boston. It's called the Tremont House, which I thought was kind of interesting because we have Tremont here in Cleveland. But from the description that I read, 5 stories with a dome and with pillars in front, I thought that maybe the Ohio City Exchange might have looked something like this Boston hotel. Or it might have looked like this. This is the Weddell House that stood in Cleveland from the 1840s until about the 1890s, maybe even all the way to 1900, on the corner of West 6th and Superior. It is where Abraham Lincoln came through when he was campaigning and spoke from one of these balconies here. This one, as you can see, also 5 stories, pillars, dome on top. This was the architecture that was being built in the 1830s in Cleveland, which is kind of interesting because it was not that old of a city yet. So what do they say in real estate, right? Location, location, location. Why these bridges? Why were they important? Obviously, if you're coming from the east side of Cleveland, you're going to come through Cleveland here before you get to the canal. In fact, you'd even have to cross the canal to get down here. If you're coming from the west side, however, or if you're coming from up from south, most people came up on what is Columbus Street here. That is Route 42. Before 71, that was the main road that took you down to Columbus and those areas. So if you're a farmer coming up to bring your goods, or if you're coming in from the city to do some shopping, you're coming up this road here. And at this point, it continues on and becomes West 25th. But here it jumps over and becomes Columbus. Well, before this bridge was here, you had to come up through here, and the only way to get across to the canal was to cross at that float bridge. So to do that, you were obviously going to stop in this area for your tavern needs, for your food, to rest your horses, to maybe stay the night at that gorgeous new hotel. So that is why this bridge down here becomes really important. Because the bridge down south not only was built and was much nicer than the one up here, but John Willey, as mayor, and the Cleveland City Council declared that this floating bridge is an eyesore and an impediment to ship navigation, and they want it taken away so that everybody has to use the Columbus Street Bridge. Now, we don't know what that float bridge looked like. Again, see, Ohio City is just a little bit of a stepchild in all of this. There are no images like there are of the Columbus Street Bridge that I'll show you in a minute. But this is a bridge that I found, a floating bridge, somewhere out in New England. I found this somewhere, built in 1784. So I figure this is about the style that the floating bridge built in the 1820s in Cleveland would have been. We don't know exactly whether it worked with ropes that pulled the one side to the other so that ships could go through. The reason it had to float is it had to get out of the way if a boat or a ship had to go down the river. So that's what a floating bridge did. Some of them were on pontoons, on boats actually, but from a couple of descriptions that exist, it seems to be this one was pulled with ropes. The new bridge, however, was a drawbridge. This is it being built. We've got some pictures of it here. And this is the picture of the new Columbus Street Bridge. Again, not a photograph, painting, so an artist's rendering. And you could see the boat coming through and the drawbridge is coming up to let that boat through. Now, what's interesting to me about these pictures is I just told you what a boomtown Cleveland was, right? But if you're looking down here, and again, I don't know if this is artist license or if this is more true to what it really looked like rather than what the developers imagined it was going to look like. Excuse me. But you could see that this is the Columbus Peninsula, still pretty barren, and that ship's landing, that public landing would have been up around the corner here, so it just didn't make it into the picture. But you can see up on the hill, Cleveland, and how grown up it is over there. You can't really see Ohio City, including that lovely 5-story hotel. So I don't know whether that was just deliberately left out, whether it hadn't been finished yet, or what the story is on these. This picture is from the other angle. So this is going up the hill. If anybody's a West Sider, Hooples, the bar Hooples would be right about here. So if that gives you your bearings. And then down here is where our Merwin's Wharf for the Cleveland Metroparks restaurant is, down along this area here somewhere. And the rowing club is over here. So just kind of give you an idea of where you're at. So while these people were competing for taverns and stores and business, as I said, the mayor and his group of people said, we only need one bridge, we do not need 2 bridges. And the people of Ohio City said, nope, we're happy with our float bridge. We are going to keep it there. And pretty soon they came to blows. These paintings are all, by the way, by William Sidney Mount. They are paintings from the 1830s. They are taken probably somewhere in upstate New York where he did a lot of his work. But I figured it would give you a good visual of what people would have been dressing like, what these guys would have looked like as they were about to go to war. Now, I use that picture of those little boys about to fight, but a newspaper in Columbus decided to compare the Ohio City and Cleveland City debacle and debate over these bridges to a couple of young ladies who have just been let out of the nursery. I'm going to read this to you. I know you can read it, but I find this amusing in so many ways. According to the Ohio State Journal, which is a Columbus newspaper, mind you, Columbus had been a city a little bit longer, so they were a little more grown up than Cleveland and Ohio City. We observed that the fair but precocious twins, Cleveland and Ohio, since they have been raised to the dignity of cities, have assumed the character of rival belles, and are now contending warmly, not about the conquest of some smart dashing beau, but for the possession of an old rotten bridge not worth a sixpence. We would advise the graceless hoydens to cease their unladylike squabbles, for if they continue much longer to quarrel, at least on such a subject, they may expect to be excluded from the drawing room and sent back to the nursery, there to remain until they shall have learnt better manners. We could pick that thing apart with so many interesting worldview of the 1830s in that. The fact that these two cities who are squabbling are now ladies. I'm not sure any ladies in Cleveland were dressed quite that fancy in those days. They did have access to some nice things, but I just thought this was a great image to show you of our squabbling Cleveland and Ohio. But the newspapers were full of the debates and the goings on as this heated up, this argument over these bridges. Most of these newspapers that I was able to get a hold of articles from are Cleveland newspapers. They're the Cleveland Herald, the Cleveland Advertiser, the Cleveland Leader, the Cleveland Gazette, and then several papers out of the city. But there was a city paper in Ohio City called the Argus. I have not been able to find any digitized versions of the Argus, so I don't know what they were saying on their side of the river. But I do know that over here, according to the Cleveland Herald, they were noting that the Ohio Argus was talking about the outrages at the bridge and sort of claiming that all of the outrages were on the part of the city of Ohio and that they were perfectly peaceable until the people of Ohio fired on them, and then they started throwing rocks. The Argus evidently said it was, that way, and the Cleveland said, no, they started it, and then we had to fire on them because they were acting up. So there's a lot of he said going on there, which is nothing new to those of us who live in today's world, right? But there were several attempts over the summer. As I said, John Willey, the mayor, said that the old bridge needed to come down. And since it was a floating bridge, Clevelanders simply went down and cut away their part of the bridge, rendering the bridge useless because it couldn't reach all the way to the other shore. So in retaliation, the people from Ohio City came down and tried to blow up several times the stone abutments to the new bridge, succeeding several times in at least damaging it. And at first I was thinking dynamite, and then I looked up, dynamite wasn't invented until the 1860s. So it was probably gunpowder that they were using to try to blow this thing up. It says there was a hole made in this. There is, this one I love, it says that women and children were compelled to flee their beds in the dead of night because stone from the supposed stone weighing about 200 pounds from the bridge landed in houses 10 rods away, and lives of families and individuals were jeopardized. This all came to a head in October, on October 31st, when not only was that they tried to blow up the bridge, which was the October 27th, I believe. This one's, the newspaper said 29th, but the 27th is when that happened. Not only did they try to blow up the bridge, but when the people from Cleveland City came to defend said blowing up of the bridge, the Ohio City men showed up with guns and bludgeons, and a small battle erupted. The sheriff was knocked down. Whether he was hit in the head with a bludgeon, whether he was pushed to the ground and was hit, we don't know. At that point, they started firing. They grabbed an old cannon, which had been used in the War of 1812, and tried to fire it, but it kind of imploded on itself, luckily, so there were no cannonballs flying. And then, as I said, the Ohio City Argus said, well, we just want our bridge. We think this is unfair. We want our bridge, and we just came to protest peacefully. And the Clevelander said, no, we had to send out the city officials to fire on them. And that's what happened on October 31st. This one over here it says 2 o'clock in the morning, another attempt. That was actually November 2nd. So even after that melee at the bridge where the sheriff was injured, there were still some more attempts to destroy this bridge. On November 10th, the paper noted that there were committees from both sides of the debate, both sides of the river, sitting down, maybe finally as they should have months ago, to talk about this whole situation. They are saying that people from both sides need to refrain from acts of violence and they should resort only to legal measures. A free country, the laws must be respected and there can be no lawless violence. And then they said that there are several lawsuits pending. So they went to the courts to say whether this original bridge could stand along with the new bridge. They weren't going to get rid of the new bridge. First of all, it cost $15,000 to build it. The people that built it, James Clark and John Willie and them, then gave it to the city as a toll bridge, but it wasn't going anywhere. So the Ohio City just simply wanted the other bridge to remain or to be allowed to build their own bridge at that same spot where the floating bridge was. So now it goes into court and it said that the committee ruled that the Columbus Street Bridge remain and the old floating bridge can be placed back where it was. And that's where it was going to stay until it came, the decision came down from the court. And after that, what happened was not very exciting at all. I have not been able to find any more mention of this bridge. There doesn't seem to be, I suppose if I went and looked in the court records, I would find out. Obviously, the Center Street Bridge stayed. It's still there to this day. There is a bridge there. But after all of that hoopla, after all of the people going to battle and people maybe getting injured, luckily nobody was killed. But as amusing as it sometimes seems from the distance of 170 years or whatever it is now, it still was, it could have been really ugly and people got hurt and people could have been killed. So the fact that it just kind of fizzled out, who knows why? Perhaps they did calm down, cooler heads prevailed. Let's see, it got to be November. What happens in Cleveland in the winter? It gets a little cold and nobody wants to be out fighting over bridges, right? Plus, if the ice is thick enough, you can actually walk across the river. Now, one thing that did happen was the Panic of 1837. In the 1900s, whenever there was a depression, what we would call it, or even a recession, the word they used was panic. I think that's a great word. A depression or a recession just sounds so somber, but panic is like, oh my God, we have no money, everybody panic. And I don't mean to make light of that because people were thrown out of work. This picture from the New York, because we don't have any pictures of Cleveland during this Panic of 37, but shows people out of work, people on the streets, people, lying in the gutter over here, people drinking. It was from 1837 through the mid 40s, all of that commerce that the canal had brought in, all of those grand plans down by the canal for Ohio City and Cleveland, the hotels, the taverns, everything kind of slowed down. As it does during Depression. And it took till the mid 40s for this to come back. By that time, I believe that the Center Street Bridge had been made into a more formal, permanent kind of bridge, and the old disagreement over the Columbus Street Bridge had kind of petered out. And then, in 1854, voters in both cities approved the annexation of the city of Ohio, which was its formal name, and it was called Ohio City, but on the charter it was actually the city of Ohio, into the city of Cleveland. So by 1854, this area here where John Willie and James Clark had their beginnings, and this area over here where Josiah Barber and Richard Lord had theirs, now this was all one city. There had even been some, before Ohio City became part of Cleveland, they had annexed much of Brooklyn Township down here. All of this was Brooklyn Township at one time. And it retains its name down by the zoo is Brooklyn, right? So, and Old Brooklyn, and that they were all part of Brooklyn Township, and Ohio City was too. And then Cleveland had little by little begun to annex further and further out, and eventually would annex further and further south, and would grow into this city altogether. Still divided by this river though, which to this day kind of gives us our east side, west side. Now see, I have dual citizenship. I think I told you last year at my presentation about the river. I was raised in Lyndhurst till I was 10. We lived with my grandparents when my dad was going to Western Reserve University. So we lived in Lyndhurst, and then at the age of 10, I moved out to Avon, so in Lorain County. So I have lived on the east side and the west side. I have dual citizenship. I can cross the river without a passport. One of the first things that this new city of the joined Ohio City and Cleveland was to create a new bridge. This is the earliest picture we have of what became the Main Avenue Bridge before it was a high-rise. This is a swing bridge. You can see ships coming through. It's on a pivot, basically. I'm not an engineer, so I'm sure there's a more technical term for that, that it would pivot around, open, let the ship in, and then pivot back in and become a bridge again. So this was the bridge at Main Avenue. It may have been similar to the bridge at Center Street. Again, we don't have any descriptions or pictures of Center Street Bridge, you know, after it became the floating in its progression until 1901. And then I'm going to show you that bridge in a minute here. But this is the Main Avenue Bridge, which eventually became the Main Avenue High Level Bridge in the 1930s, and then was replaced by the Innerbelt Bridge. So when you go over the Innerbelt Bridge, you're kind of going over the same place that this one was. And this was the first bridge built by the new joined cities of Ohio City and City of Cleveland. Little geography here. I've been talking about the Columbus Street Bridge and the Center Bridge, and I showed you on the old map. I thought I'd show you on a new map to give you some bearings. So this the yellow arrow down, that is the Columbus Street Bridge. We are with the west side over here to the right, so it's backwards from what a map would be. There's the Columbus Peninsula. There is Merwin's Wharf down along the river here. There is the RTA Bridge. We're running right along there. And over here is the Center Street Bridge. Many of you have probably crossed the Columbus Street Bridge at one time or another. You may have done the Center Street Bridge. It's not used very much anymore. It's a small swing bridge, goes under the Detroit Superior Bridge. So that's the Center Street Bridge there. That grand hotel of 5 stories and marble pillars would have been right about, let's see, that's Winslow. I think that's Maine. Yep, right here, there's Maine. So it would have been right here. Somewhere right here, that great big hotel would have been. So you could see how convenient it was to this bridge here. This is a picture I found of an early type of swing bridge. So if the Center Street Bridge had been replaced by an early swing bridge in the 1840s, maybe even late 1830s, it would have looked something similar to this. This is what the Center Street Bridge looks like today. I went on Google Maps and plopped myself down here and took a picture of it. You can drive across this bridge. It's on a pivot in the middle, and it does swing open. And here's a picture I found of it when it's open. So it's completely over here on the grass here. And there's the center support that does the swinging. Again, I'm not an engineer. Our historical cultural interpreter, Doug Cusack, and I'll talk a little bit more about one of his programs a little bit later. He is an absolute expert on how all of these bridges down in the flats work, and he can tell you all about them down to how they work scientifically. That's not my thing. I'm more interested in the people that built them. But this particular bridge was built in 1901. So it's one of the oldest bridges now in the flats, and it still works. The Columbus Street Bridge, however, went through many, many iterations. That first one that we looked at the very beginning, that lovely artist's rendering of the bridge with the drawbridge, was replaced somewhere in the 1860s or the 1870s. Several times they got permission from City Council to build a new bridge, but then it didn't seem to happen. So the contract would be let out, and I read in 1858 they were supposed to build a new one, and then all of a sudden 1864 they're building a new one, and 1868, between 1868 and 1870, it was an iron swing bridge, and it was built, or drawbridge, excuse me, and it was built by the King Bridge Company of Cleveland. Iron bridges were the new thing in the 1860s. This man, Zenas King, had come up with a way of creating basically iron tubes that allowed them to build bridges. So this is the oldest picture we have of the Columbus Street Bridge after that initial bridge. And this is from like an 1888 stereoptic picture that I found on the New York Public Library site. So you never know where you're going to find pictures of Cleveland. I believe, from looking at it, I'm pretty sure that we are looking towards the west. That again, I'll go by the bar Hooples. Hooples would be right about there. And then you're going up Columbus Street to West 25th. In 1895, the King Bridge Company again built a double swing bridge. According to what I have read, it was the first in the country, maybe even in the world, but definitely in the country, built again by the King Bridge Company and designed down here. It shows you by the chief engineer. And this was the Cuyahoga County and Cleveland engineering people. And this is how it works. So you've got two bridges, and instead they both swing out in the middle there like this, and then back like this to let the ships in. So that was built in 1895, and it was a pretty big deal. This drawing that I found down here showing how it works was from the Society of Engineers, like journal, a national journal, and they were just praising this new type of bridge and how it was going to revolutionize bridges. You can see the little house up here and up here where the bridge keeper that was there to turn the bridge when needed and turn it back to its regular position. I'm not sure if this picture was taken in 1895. It may have been taken a little bit later, but the bridge was definitely built in 1895. And then in the 1930s, one of the WPA projects actually was to create this lift bridge at Columbus. So now instead of swinging on a pendulum, there is a bridge that can go up and lower down. And here it is in its up position for one of the lake shipping freighters, the ore boats, to come through. The Cuyahoga River is a shipping channel that has to be dredged to 25 feet to allow ships to come in and go down. Now they go about as far as ArcelorMittal, the steel plant down there, which at one time was LTV Steel, Republic Steel, and that's the ore boats had to be able to get through. It is a federal shipping channel, and it has been since the 1820s. So the Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for keeping it. They are also responsible for approving all the plans of any bridges along here to make sure that they can let these ships in and out. And finally, in 2014, right after the Cleveland Metroparks had begun opening our Berwyn's Wharf restaurant along the river here, they decided it was time for a new bridge again. It looks very similar to the one I just showed you that was built in the 1930s, but this one was just built in 2014. Here they are bringing on a barge the center portion, the lift portion of the bridge, and to begin putting it in place. I don't remember exactly how long they were working on this. It felt like forever because you couldn't, of course, go across the Columbus Bridge. In fact, many people had to go down around and use the Center Street Bridge. Isn't that ironic? I wonder what Richard Lord and Josiah Barber would think about that, huh? So this bridge took several months at least to have it done. And of course, you know, weather in Cleveland can mess things up. But finally it opened up. And here it is in all its glory. The way you can ride across it today, state-of-the-art mechanics and electronics to raise and lower this bridge. And there's a picture of it. I have to put a little plug in normal times. I would say, hey, head down to Merwin's, get a bite to eat and watch the bridge. They are going to be, I'm told, open in the winter. They're going to have igloos out on the patio so that you can have your own little personal dining space. And there's going to be a river fest, and they're going to put an ice skating rink here. So stay tuned, looking for that. Fun along the river. It's just so cool. Even if you're just going down there to sit, grab a drink and sit at one of the tables here to watch the boats come in and out, and occasionally watch the bridge lower and lift. It's just kind of a fun, cool Cleveland thing to do. Cleveland is, of course, a city of bridges. This is from a 1906 newspaper article just extolling all of the different types of bridges that we had all over the Flats area. And even out, they broadened Cleveland a little bit because they're showing the bridge over Rocky River and all the different engineering marvels that these bridges were. They really were, at their time, they're fascinating now, but at the time, many of them were the first of their kind and prototypes for bridges that were built then all over the world. I mentioned the King Bridge Company. Zenas King was an iron worker and started concentrating on bridges, came up with this patented idea to create hollow tubes, iron tubes to create bridges, which were lighter weight, obviously, than just wrought iron. This is his King Ironworks or Bridge Works at the corner of St. Clair and Wasson Streets. And I forgot to look up and see which that is, because now that would be a numbered street. So I apologize, I forgot to do that. But it is, that was the King Bridge Works. He made bridges all over the world. Many of them are still standing. If you have some time and you're interested, just Google the King Bridge Company or Z King Bridge Company. And lots of people have gone out and taken pictures of their bridges that are remaining, including that Center Street Bridge. And you can just find a lot of cool things about them. The central, or the viaduct, the Superior Viaduct, this is the bridge that was a bit of a game changer. So all of those ones that I showed you earlier were, they had drawbridges, swing bridges, you know, that you had to kind of, they were down low by the river, and then you had to go up a hill or down a hill to get to them. This one decided, the viaduct, they built this beautiful stone arches here, which is what a viaduct is. It's a bridge made of several different sections. This is a drawing of it showing that work. It's still down there. It's Bridge Street on the west bank of the Flats. If you're on Bridge Street, you're on top of this and you can actually walk up. The towpath goes past a lot of these. Here's what it kind of looked like when it was open. So it had this center section, again, a swing bridge, just a very, very large one. It was a real game changer in that it gave a big, broad, lots of room for traffic, though it quickly got congested, from the east side to the west side. And the interesting thing to me is, of course, is that it connected right over to Detroit Street and right through the middle of Ohio City, and right where Josiah Barber and Richard Lord wanted the traffic to be directed many, many years before. However, all things come to an end. The Superior Viaduct was built in 1878. By the early 1900s, it was crowded, and the idea of having to stop every time it swung open and closed was creating more and more congestion. Automobiles were now popular. Streetcars, all of these things were going over this bridge, and it would cause a big backup every time the bridge had to open. So the county decided to build what is now known as the Detroit Superior Bridge. The engineer that designed this bridge was William Stinchcomb. William Stinchcomb is also the founder of the Cleveland Metroparks. So that's my connection to the Detroit Superior Bridge. I walked across this bridge one summer, folks. Let me tell you, when you drive across it, it seems like you go across like that. When you walk, believe it or not, it's on an incline. And I felt like I was walking straight uphill all the way across. It's a long bridge to walk across. But this bridge was built in 1917, and it's a high-level bridge. Again, using new steel construction that had come about in late 1800s, early 1900s. So now they could build a bridge with concrete and steel, and it would be strong enough to be built high enough up over the traffic that they don't need to open it for boats. You can drive across that bridge as a boat's coming through any day of the week. So that is my story about Cleveland bridges. I will leave you with a couple notes. One is that we have a boat called the LC2. It is Doug Cusack, our cultural historical interpreter out of Canal Basin Center, usually mans this boat in the summer. We don't know if we're going to be able to open in the summer. Fingers crossed that things will have calmed down a bit with the pandemic, that we can actually safely get people on the boat. It's a great way to spend an afternoon on the river. And like I said, Doug can tell you about every bridge on the river, when it was built, how it works, the railroad bridges, the car bridges, all of the different bridges that line the flats up and down the river. Doug can tell you all about them. And I will promise you this, we won't care if you're from the east side or the west side. We won't ask any questions. Everybody on this boat, we're all in it together. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Judy. That was awesome. So we got some questions. Should I jump right in, Mindy?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So we have a lot of really good ones. Let's start with the ones in the Q&A function. So this one's from Paul. So hi, Paul. So
hi, Paul.
Are there any of the 1800s original buildings near the river still in existence?
Yes, yes, there are. If you are on the, if you're heading towards the mouth of the river and you are, let's say, Shooters is on your left-hand side as you're heading towards the river. On the right-hand side of the river, there are several buildings right there that were still, that they were shipping chandlers, actually were out of those shipping chandlers, which they ran the tugboats on the river. They supplied the boats along the river. They're from the late 1800s. They're not from the 1830s. I can't think of any building that was built in the 1830s that still exists along the river, you know, from that time period we were originally talking about. There's a building down in the flats, Stearns, from the Stearns Stone Company. It was built in 1850. And it's down in the flats. It's a little brick building on Merwin Street. You kind of have to walk along Merwin Street to find that. Down in the warehouse district, along West 6, and that area. Oh, the shipping chandlers I was just telling you about, I think that's actually West 10th, now that I think about it. But West 6 and down in the warehouse district there to the west of Public Square, a lot of those were built at least as far back as the 1850s and 60s. So those are the ones that we have. I can't think of anything, like I said, that from the 1830s. Yeah, no, those are pretty much all gone. You'd have to go all the way out to Dunham, to the Dunham Tavern, which is a museum out on Euclid Avenue. And that one is actually from like the 1820s.
And is that largely a function of just taking them down or building over them? Or is it more that, you know, the architecture wasn't meant to be something that would last a considerable amount of time?
No, it was meant to last, I think, but we don't like old stuff. You could tell I'm a little bitter about that. No, actually, like any big city, the needs of the people changed. And, you know, there were those gorgeous mansions along Euclid Avenue that stood there until the early 1900s, and there's like 4 of them left, maybe. They were in the way. We need parking lots, you know, the needs changed. And people are all, even back then, so fascinated with the new. That's why that interesting comment by the John Willey, by the mayor, saying, well, that old bridge needs to go. It's an eyesore. And so, well, that bridge was only maybe 10 years old. Now, granted, that original floating bridge wasn't meant to stay the course, but that building, when they talked about that beautiful 5-story hotel, also plumbing, electricity, gas, all of those things that people wanted in their homes so that they weren't shivering in the winter and dying in the summer. So yeah, so that's a lot of it. Is just architecture, space changed, people's needs changed, and cities are one of the first to tear down and build up and rebuild and build over. Much of the land along our lakefront wasn't even there. That land was even created. So you know, that's just kind of how we roll in cities. I read an article one time about New York, where a New Yorker in the 1840s was complaining that you could go away for the summer and come back to the neighborhood you grew up in, it would all be different. So, you know, this is nothing new. It's not special to Cleveland. We're lucky that we have throughout the Western Reserve, outside of Cleveland, go to Hudson, go to Chagrin Falls. You want to see buildings and houses like you would have seen in Cleveland in the 1830s. Those are the places to see them. And of course, Hale Farm and Village, which has preserved some of those for with the Western Reserve Historical Society.
It's not just Cleveland. We're not just a city that takes.
No, it's not just Cleveland.
Universal.
It's universal. And as my granddaughter said to me one time, looking at one of the older buildings at Case Western Reserve, which is she asked if it was a castle. She was about 7. And I said, no, it's actually a chapel. But it's built kind of like and then she looked at a building built in the 1960s and she goes, why did they build that? It's ugly. She goes, new buildings just aren't as charming as old ones. And I said, yes, you are correct. Good girl.
Well learned.
Exactly.
Well, we had a lot of questions on the Center Street Bridge, swing bridge itself. So that manifestation of it. And this is one I've always wondered myself. It's from Matthew. And does the Center Street Bridge actually have an operator in the little building that is the one who's responsible for closing it? Because I know this is small.
Question, because I've been over it several times and I don't see any, but I'm not sure whether there's an operator there or whether they're remote. I think now that they might be remote, that it might, you know, trigger something, or it's just like a laser eye. I do not know the exact answer to that. I could find it out, but I don't think so, because I've been over that bridge, and unless I just wasn't paying attention, I don't know the answer to that. I apologize. I will find that out. I will email you, Megan, and you can put it out in the cybersphere somewhere.
We can put on our social media as a good answer. So another reason to like the Artist Archives social media page, Bridge Answers.
There you go.
Just saying.
Good answer.
Well, we also have, we got some good questions. So I believe we actually answered the one, is the Center Street Bridge sitting on the same spot as the float bridge? And we said yes, approximately.
Yes, approximately, you know, given the changes a little bit in the river, but yeah, it shows up. If you go look at old maps and you kind of overlay them, yep, keeps showing up in the Center Street is there. It's off of Center Street, so yeah.
And then there was a great one about so we'll group the bridge ones together. So speaking of history, how come there isn't a historical marker on the Hoople side of the bridge, which you know exactly where that is? Folks waiting for the bridge lift could get a great history lesson before they crossed.
That would be interesting. Yeah, I mean, we've got a sign down by Merwin's Wharf, of course, because that's our property. So I have a sign about the bridge war down there. And it kind of shows that. The thing with historical markers, that's a whole different thing that you have to apply for to get a historical marker. And then if you get, the Ohio History Center awards that to you, but they don't give you the marker, you have to go buy the marker. So somebody would have to do that. Perhaps the Cleveland Preservation Society might be interested in doing that. I think it would be really cool. Wouldn't it be cool if we could have a video that would just flash up on the bridge while you're waiting, and it could give you a little story? That would be even better than a marker, I think. So, but yeah, that's so yeah. If you want to read about it, though, you can go down to Merwin's. I know I keep pushing Merwin's. So.
Do you know how much those markers run? Ballpark? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, 500 to 800 and up.
Woo! So you need a good sponsor.
They're brass. They're usually made of brass. Usually, they're there if there's a historical marker because something has been designated a historical landmark. Well, that new bridge is only from 2014. So, I don't know how they would work that as a spot, because it's not the bridge itself. Now the Center Street Bridge could probably be a historic landmark because it's a 1901 bridge that's still working. So
there was so it was so connected to Merwin's Wharf. So where do people go to find out more about this like amazing winter wonderland that is occurring at Merwin's Wharf? Where's a good place to keep an eye on so they can see that as that happens?
ClevelandMetroparks.com, and our social media page, our Facebook, you can go and like Cleveland Metroparks Facebook page, and they will definitely keep you up to date on that.
Awesome. Then we got another one concerning can you tell us what happens to the West Side Hotel or any of the bridges that no longer exists? Were they dismantled or anything like that?
I have found a very interesting phenomena, and anywhere that I'm doing, and including in our Metroparks sometimes, when a building goes up, there's a big to-do about it, right? We have a dedication, and it's like this beautiful building, and it's the grand opening. And when a building comes down, at least within 100 years ago. Now, a lot of times, because we have that crazy implosion for a big building, which everybody gathers and takes pictures of, when a building comes down, there's not that much mention of it. It is really hard to find out when. The closest I can come is, like I said, that Ohio City Exchange. I kept reading about it up until about the 1870s, 1880s. In the newspaper. So I would go through a digital newspaper and put in the words Ohio City Exchange and then just see what pops up. I have a database of digitized newspapers that I listen to or that I look at. And all of a sudden it's not showing up anymore, and I can figure that it was gone. But I did not find well, we're taking this down. The old Ohio City Exchange is coming down, and nobody seemed to take pictures of those things. We do now. But then again, we're all walking around with cameras in our hands all the time, documenting everything, right? So again, it was more to do with, we want to celebrate the new, and when the old go away, it's very rare that I can pinpoint the exact time something came down, and it frustrates me no end. Because there needs to be bookends, right? This building was built and this building was taken down, and it just is not always possible. But I keep trying.
No, that's a really good perspective. That it's almost an American impulse to idolize and hyper accelerate the new, and then just sort of let the old kind of slip away.
Yep.
So let's see, recent program available. So there was one which is that, is Ohio City then officially considered the oldest suburb of Cleveland? No,
I would say no, because, and here's the reason why. It was never a suburb. It was its own city, and then it was the city. It was part of the city. And then I'm not sure when we started using the word Ohio City again. It was as it became revitalized, and then all of a sudden it was Ohio City. The old term came back. And it maybe it kept it, for the people that lived there, perhaps they used it all along, but it wasn't touted as that, and then it just became the West Side. So I don't think it's a suburb. A suburb is technically like Cleveland Heights is a suburb, though it's its own city too. So that's kind of hard to. suburbs were purpose-built to get out of the city. Ohio City was created to be the city. So I think that's the difference there. I live in Avon. Avon is now considered a suburb of Cleveland. But when I was growing up, Avon was just a small town in Lorain County. Now my dad, some people did go to Cleveland to work, obviously, but it wasn't considered a suburb. And so usually a suburb is purpose-built. Shaker Heights was definitely a suburb. To get away from the city, to have greenery and have nice curved streets and pretty yards and yeah, I'll go ahead and say it, and the proper neighbors. Suburbs were usually built with restrictions as to who could live there because that was part of their appeal. So.
No, that's a really good distinction too. I think that we have this kind of idea of calling everything suburbs, or even like now we name every neighborhood for branding, like, you know, like Hingetown, for example, or things like that.
Yes, exactly. Branding, that's where I think, yeah, it came along with branding.
So then speaking of branding, this one actually goes right into it. And I believe, and then I'll double check to see if I missed any, but at what point did that area we're talking about start to be, did Irish immigration occur to start to being called the Irish Bend? And then past that, when did Irish Bend start to be referred to as Collision Bend? Because I know there's a little progression that goes there.
Okay, Irish Bend and Collision Bend are two different areas. You know what, let's see, I could go, let me go back to my map. It might be easier if I could show, is my screen still being shared?
Yes, your screen is still being shared.
Okay. Actually, well, here's a good one. This, where these trees are, that's Irishtown Bend. Right across from Merwin's, right down from Columbus Street, along Franklin Street. Irish started moving in there probably around the 1840s, about the time, well, 1848, the Irish famine, when we had a large influx of Irish immigrants, came to that area. However, they also lived in what was called the Angle, which is up closer to where we were talking about that big hotel and the area in Ohio City. Yeah, see, that's Irishtown Bend here too, along here. So, I know my map's in here somewhere. Gosh, I guess it was way, way back at the beginning, wasn't it? Well, there we go. Here's a good spot. All right. So yeah, this is Irishtown Bend. I kind of find it amusing that it's green again. It's just not green with Irish people. It's green with green, you know, that's it. But this area is kind of fallen into where hopefully they're going to get it shored up and make a new park along here. But then this is the Detroit Superior Bridge. So this is West 25th. This area here also was Irish. This was called the Old Angle. So up here in Ohio City was where the Irish. So the Irish came in around the 1840s. There was a second part to that question. Read the question again, please, Megan.
It was, when did the Irish immigrate to the area, to making it Irish Bend? And then after that, when did it become known as Collision Bend?
Collision Bend. Okay, Collision Bend. I don't even know if it's on any of my maps because it's not in the area. Well, okay, yes it is. So this is Collision Bend up here. It's, if you're sitting in Tower City and you go to the food court and you look out over the river, you're looking at Collision Bend. You can kind of see why it was called Collision Bend. Look at that crazy kind of bend that it's no longer that curved though. Over the years, they widened it and smoothed it out here so that there weren't as many collisions there. But that's Collision Bend up here. This is Irishtown Bend, and this is the Old Angle up in here.
Is that the site of where the Old Angle pub is right now? The Old Angle?
In that general area, yes. Okay. Which I love. I hope it survives the pandemic. Their fish and chips are amazing.
So good, so good. Let's see, and we have a final bridge question, and then we'll get into where to find all the good stuff. Do you know if they are taking down the Willow Bridge? And by the way, this is from archived artist Jenny Jones, who has spent a ton of time photographing this area beautifully, in fact.
Nice,
And,
nice.
yeah, and in
Love
fact,
to see those, Jenny.
Yes, and in fact,
Yeah.
Jenny's work will be, she's doing an artist talk with Stuart Pearl, who is also on the call. And
That's
that
right.
is going to be, what's the date on that one, Mindy? Do you recall? There's going to be, it's 4 p.m.
Yeah, that's November 11th, so it's actually a week from tonight.
There you go.
Veterans. Okay, so the Willow Street Bridge is actually a whole nother ballgame, of course, because, right, like it's lovely on this map here, all these little roads, see all these little roads with these names, and one of them is Willow Street, somewhere along here. I can't quite see it, it's right there, I think. A lot of these never came to be. These were on paper only. They never actually, where Whiskey Island is, there really weren't streets on Whiskey Island. It literally was a few ice houses because they used to drag ice from the river. There were some shipping areas along here. You know, it's almost always been industrial. It's also, anybody know why it's named Whiskey Island?
Prohibition?
That is the lore, that it was named that for Prohibition coming over from Canada. Makes sense, right? No, they called it Whiskey Island back in the 1830s. There was a still on this at one point, a distillery on Whiskey Island back as early as maybe even the 1820s. So that's why it was Whiskey Island. But the Willow Street Bridge and all of that is part of the towpath project. So if you go to either to our website, I think we've got some information on there. If you go to the Canalway Partners or just Google the towpath and what's going on, as the old towpath obviously really can't follow the old original canal, because the canal only was in here for a very little while, and then by 1874, the Valley Railroad came through and built the railroad, which then became the B&O Railroad, right over this part of the canal. And the canal then stopped right about here. So, and then all of this is industry. So the towpath has had to take some liberties with its travels along the way. And then the towpath and the connector trails that is going to connect you to the lakefront trails, that's all part of what's going on with the Willow Street Bridge. They're building a pedestrian bridge there so that you can get over here to over here to Wendy Island, or Wendy Park on Whiskey Island, and take the lakefront towpath trails, which are lake link trails that then will get you to the towpath. And then you can follow the towpath all the way down to Akron and points beyond eventually. So that Willow Street Bridge is all part of that whole construction project there. And I am not really firm on the details, so I don't want to give you wrong information. Go to Canalway Partners. I know that our chief engineer did a little blip on it for, which is on our Facebook page, or you can go to our page and just put in there towpath questions and it'll come up. And you can also email Doug Cusack at Cleveland Metroparks, because Doug, again, is the expert on all things bridges in the flats, and including that bridge there and the towpath as it goes through there. So that's what's going on with the Willow Street Bridge. A little bit of personal history. At the other end of the Willow Street Bridge, which went across the little shipping channel there, my husband's great-great-grandfather lived there at one point in time. That was literally his address in the 1880 census, was that he lived on the side of on Willow Street by the bridge. So
it's so amazing to hear all the different parts, because we drive over it and we don't see it, and so it's awesome. And that's actually, we have wonderful responses, and then I see that we're at 8:15, so we'll start wrapping it up. But to let people know, yes, we have a lot of questions that the program will be available. It takes us about a week to put it on the website. We have to format it and trim it up a little bit, so we'll be doing that. So we'll go ahead and drop the link right here. And then we will make sure to put the additional information. We can put it on the email. If anybody has any questions about getting that email or additional information from Judy, feel free to email me. I'll put that in the chat as well. Info@artist.com.
Feel free to share my email.
That'll be
no
okay?
problem. I get crazy questions all the time, which are fun. I get these, you know, my family used to go to such and such. What do you know about it? Absolutely love it. That's one of my favorite parts of my job.
Perfect.
So,
We'll go
if I don't know the answer, I can usually find it.
So we'll go ahead and get that up. I'm getting that right now. And here, everybody grab it, is Judy's email. Suck it up. Just eat it up right there. And then I believe that is actually, it's perfect timing. I think that's everything we have. Can we see the presentation again? Future webinars, see it again. And yes, I think that is it. If Mindy, I'm going to throw it back to Mindy, who, shout out, by the way, it was Mindy and Judy who brainstormed this idea for the program. That was all them, and it was brilliant. So it was wonderful to see so many people sign on, and yep, it's wonderful to get the release. This is a great one. So with further ado, back to Mindy, and thank you so much, Judy.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, Judy, thank you so much. Great presentation. We're really lucky here in Cleveland to have the Metroparks system. And and thanks for, you know, telling us a little bit more about some of the stuff that's going on now in the Metroparks to really renovate that whole area down by the Cuyahoga River. It's turning into a beautiful space.
Can I put in a plug too? Every Saturday at 3 o'clock, at least until further notice, or we get blizzarded out, we've got a history hike somewhere in the park system, west side, east side, all around the town. 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoons, history hikes.
Cool. And can we find that on the Metroparks website? Are those listed?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And it's under our events. You do have to register because we can only take 9 people plus the person doing the hike. And you do have to wear masks, and we're doing it safely. But they're a lot of fun. So come out and join me on one.
Thank you. That's great. That's a great thing to do, especially this time when we all need to get outside a little bit more outside of our houses. Well, I'd just like to thank everyone again for coming. We had a wonderful turnout for the program. And please come and see the show, Bridges and Barriers, that this program is actually part of up till next Saturday. And hopefully we'll see you at the next opening reception also for About Body, About Face. Thanks everybody for coming. And I think we're gonna go ahead and sign off for tonight.
Thank you.
Yep, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night.
Bye, everybody.